This story is titled, My Brother Convinced Everyone I Was Dead for 3 years to Steal My Inheritance. But then I showed up at Mom's wedding, and the look on his face when she said, Wait, is that really you? He never expected what happened next. Hi everyone! Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Hey everyone! So, I've been sitting on this for a while, trying to make sense of everything. And honestly, I still don't know how to process it. If someone had told me 3 years ago that my own brother would fake my death and steal my inheritance, I'd have laughed in their face. But here we are. I figured I'd share this because, well, I need advice. And maybe someone out there can learn from my experience. A little about me first. I'm Liam, 30 male, and I've always been pretty close with my family. Or at least I thought I was. Growing up, my older brother Eric, who's 32 now, was my best friend. He was the guy I looked up to, the person I trusted more than anyone. So when I got the opportunity to work abroad in Iceland, I didn't think twice about asking Eric to help me handle things back home. The job was something I couldn't pass up. I've always loved maps, and I landed this gig as a digital cartographer, which basically meant traveling to remote parts of Iceland to survey land and create detailed maps. The work was intense but amazing. The catch? I'd be in some pretty isolated areas with spotty communication. Sometimes I'd go weeks without any phone or internet access. Before leaving, I signed a power of attorney over to Eric so he could handle my property and bills while I was away. He seemed happy to help. We even had this big send-off dinner where he told me how proud he was. Looking back, it's like a punch in the face remembering how sincere he seemed. Anyway, I settled into life in Iceland, and things were going great. My days were spent hiking, exploring glaciers, and charting landscapes that felt otherworldly. I'd check in with my family whenever I could, but it wasn't often. And for the past 3 years, it was Eric whom I contacted back home, as he was the only one available. The time zone differences and bad service made it tough, and everyone seemed to understand that, as Eric would tell me when I only hear about family from him. One time, my camera broke. I was documenting the areas I mapped, and without it, I couldn't do my job properly. So I trekked to Reykjavik, the nearest city, to get it fixed. While I was there, I figured I'd take the chance to check on emails, social media, and all that. I hadn't been online in over 2 years, except for the times I contacted Eric, so I was expecting the usual updates from friends and family. What I wasn't expecting was to find my own memorial post. It was surreal. My cousin had posted a long message about how I'd always be in their heart, and it was full of photos from what looked like a funeral. There were people I didn't even recognize commenting things like, "He was taken too soon," and "Rest in peace, Liam." My stomach sank. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake, like maybe someone hacked my account or it was a weird joke. But as I scrolled further, I found more posts. My mom had shared a picture of me from high school with a caption that said, "Not a day goes by that I don't miss you." I called her immediately. It went straight to voicemail. Then I called Eric. Same thing. I didn't know what else to do, so I messaged a couple of my friends, and one of them finally replied. His name's Jake. We've been tight since college. I asked him what the hell was going on, and he responded with a single question. "Dude, is this really you?" It took a few back and forths, but eventually, I convinced him I wasn't a ghost or something. That's when he dropped the bomb. Eric had told everyone I died in a car accident in Iceland. He'd even produced some kind of fake police report and claimed the local authorities couldn't recover my body because of terrain. Jake was livid. He said he'd always thought it was strange that Eric handled everything so quickly, like the funeral arrangements and settling my estate. He didn't think it was his place to question it, though, and everyone had just accepted it because, well, why wouldn't they? Eric was my brother. He was supposed to care about me. I spent the rest of that day piecing together what had happened. My mom hadn't mentioned me in any recent posts, but I saw that she'd gotten engaged, and her wedding was in 2 weeks. That hit me harder than anything else. Eric had erased me from our family so thoroughly that my mom was moving on with her life without me. I booked a flight home for the next day. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even know how I'd explain what happened, but I couldn't sit around while Eric walked away with everything. I didn't know yet how deep it all went, how much he'd stolen, or how long he'd been planning it. But I knew one thing. I had to confront him. The flight home was a blur. I kept thinking about all the little things I told Eric before I left. How I trusted him to handle my property. How I joked about him being my stand-in while I was off living my dream. Every memory of our conversations felt tainted now. I didn't even sleep. I just kept scrolling through those memorial posts, reading the comments from people who genuinely thought I was gone. When I landed, I went straight to my house, the one Eric was supposed to be taking care of. But when I got there, it wasn't my house anymore. The locks had been changed. My name wasn't anywhere on the mailbox. I tried calling Eric again, But of course, he didn't pick up. So, yeah, that's how I found myself standing in front of my mom's house, suitcase in hand, wondering how the hell I was supposed to explain that I wasn't dead. I couldn't just knock on the door and say, "Surprise!" That's when I decided to wait until the wedding. It wasn't the most thought-out plan, but I wanted to see Eric's face when he realized he couldn't keep this lie going. I still didn't know the full extent of what Eric had done. At that point, all I knew was that he'd convinced my family I was dead and somehow managed to sell my house. All I knew was that my brother had betrayed me, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I stayed at a hotel and kept my head down, avoiding anyone who might recognize me. I didn't want Eric to get wind of me being back before I confronted him. I spent most of the time trying to figure out what I'd say when I saw him. Would I yell? Would I punch him? I didn't know. I just knew I had to do it. When the wedding day finally came, I didn't feel ready, but I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had spent 2 weeks stewing in anger and confusion, replaying everything I knew about Eric's lies. The betrayal was like a fog that wouldn't lift, and the only thing I could think about was confronting him. Still, I didn't have a concrete plan. I just knew I had to be there. The wedding was being held at a church not far from where we grew up. As I approached, I saw the familiar faces of family members and old friends heading inside. It was surreal watching them laugh and chat as if nothing had happened, completely unaware that I wasn't dead. Part of me wanted to shout, "I'm alive!" right there on the street, but I held back. I wanted to time it perfectly. I waited until the ceremony was about to start. The doors to the church were still open, and I could hear the soft hum of music as people settled into their seats. My heart was racing as I walked up the steps. I felt like an outsider looking into a world I no longer belonged to, and it hurt more than I expected. Inside, the church was packed. I slipped into the back unnoticed and stood against the wall, scanning the room. My mom was at the front, sitting beside her fiancé. She looked so happy, but I could see the sadness in her eyes too, like she was trying to mask the grief of losing me. It was a strange feeling, seeing her like that. I'd always thought she'd be the first person I'd want to see when I came back, but now I didn't know what to say to her. And then there was Eric. He was standing near the altar, giving some kind of speech. I couldn't hear all of it from where I was, but I caught bits and pieces. He was talking about family and how important it was to cherish the people we love. The hypocrisy of it made me sick. How could he stand there and say those things after everything he'd done? The moment I had been waiting for came when the officiant asked if anyone had any objections. My palms were sweaty, and my heart felt like it was about to explode, but I knew this was it. I stepped forward, and my voice was louder than I expected as I said, "Yeah, I have an objection, because I'm not dead." For a second, the entire room froze. It was like time itself had stopped. Then all at once, chaos broke out. My mom gasped so loudly that it echoed through the church. Her fiancé turned to her, looking completely lost, and then back at me, as if trying to figure out if I was real. Eric, though, his reaction was something I'll never forget. He turned pale, like all the blood had drained from his face, and stumbled backward a little, knocking over a chair. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He just stared at me like I was a ghost. I walked down the aisle, and as I got closer, my niece Olivia ran straight toward me. She was crying, shouting, "Uncle Liam! Uncle Liam!" She threw her arms around my legs, holding on so tight I almost tripped. She was shaking, and I could barely hold it together myself. The whole room was buzzing with whispers. People were pointing, craning their necks to get a better look at me. Someone, I think one of the ushers, started walking toward me, probably thinking I was some kind of intruder. But before he could do anything, my mom stood up. She was crying, and her voice was shaky as she said, "Liam? Is it really you?" I nodded, and that's when she ran to me. She grabbed my face like she was trying to make sure I was real, and then hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. She kept saying, "I thought I lost you. I thought I lost you." I didn't know what to say. What do you even say in a moment like that? The officiant tried to calm everyone down, but it was no use. The wedding was officially on hold. Eric finally found his voice and started babbling about how this couldn't be possible, how he thought I was dead. He even tried to claim that he'd only recently found out I was alive, and wanted to surprise everyone at the wedding. I couldn't believe the nerve of him. I told everyone exactly what had happened, how I'd been living in Iceland, completely unaware of what he was doing. I explained how I'd found out about my supposed death and rushed back as soon as I could. I didn't have all the details about what Eric had done yet, but I knew enough to make it clear that he wasn't the victim here. The guests were in shock. Some of them looked horrified, others just confused. My mom's fiancé, Mark, stepped in at that point. He's a no-nonsense kind of guy, and he was the first person to actually ask Eric the hard question. "If Liam's alive, then who signed the death certificate? Who handled the funeral? Eric was sweating bullets by then. He stammered something about being misled by authorities in Iceland, but it was obvious no one believed him. Olivia's mom, Emily, Eric's wife, was sitting in the front row, looking like she wanted to disappear. She didn't say anything, but the way she was staring at Eric made it clear she wasn't buying his story either. At one point, Eric tried to leave. He said he needed air or something, but Mark wasn't having it. He told one of his friends, who happened to be a retired cop, to keep an eye on Eric and make sure he didn't go anywhere. Meanwhile, I was bombarded with questions from relatives and friends. People wanted to know where I'd been, how I found out, why I didn't tell anyone I was coming. It was overwhelming, but I did my best to explain without getting into too much detail. Eventually, my mom insisted on postponing the ceremony. She said she needed time to process everything, and honestly, so did I. The guests started to leave, but not before giving me hugs and pats on the back. A few of them even apologized for believing Eric's lies, which was nice, I guess, but it didn't make me feel any better about the whole situation. Eric tried to corner me as people were filing out, but I wasn't ready to talk to him yet. I told him we'd deal with it later, and he looked like he wanted to argue, but Mark stepped in and told him to back off. By the end of the day, it felt like I'd been through a war. I was emotionally drained, and my head was spinning with everything that had happened. But I knew this was only the beginning. Eric had a lot to answer for, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. The next step is figuring out just how deep his lies went. I don't know what I'd uncover, but I'm prepared for the worst. And based on what I'd already seen, I had a feeling I hadn't even scratched the surface. Update 1. Hey everyone, it's Liam again. First of all, I just want to say thanks for all the support on my first post. I didn't expect so many people to respond, and it's honestly been overwhelming, in a good way. A lot has happened since I crashed my mom's wedding, so I wanted to give you all an update on what went down afterward. So, after the whole scene at the wedding, things got even messier than I expected. The ceremony was postponed, and my mom spent the rest of the day trying to process everything. I stayed with her and her new husband, Mark, who has been surprisingly cool about all of this. He's the type of guy who stays calm under pressure, and honestly, we've needed that. The first thing we did the next morning was meet with one of the family lawyers. I hadn't spoken to him since I left for Iceland, and let me tell you, the look on his face when I walked into the office was priceless. He didn't know I was alive either. Eric had been feeding him the same lies as everyone else. Once I explained the situation, he started digging into all the legal documents Eric had filed over the past 3 years. What we found was insane. I knew Eric had done some shady stuff, but I wasn't prepared for the full extent of it. He had my death certificate, which he claimed was issued by Icelandic authorities, and he used it to do all kinds of things. First, he sold my house. He told the lawyer it was what I would have wanted, and since he had power of attorney, no one questioned it. Then he drained my savings account and funneled the money into his personal accounts. But that wasn't all. Eric also took out loans in my name, big ones. He used my death as an excuse to get around the usual checks and balances, saying he was tying up loose ends in my estate. With that money, he bought himself a fancy new car, renovated his house, and even started a side business. The guy was living it up while everyone else thought I was gone. The worst part? He hadn't just hurt me. My mom told me she'd lent Eric money from her retirement fund because he said he was struggling to pay for my funeral and settle my debts. She didn't question it because, why would she? She thought she was helping honor my memory. Hearing that broke my heart. My mom has never been wealthy, and she's worked hard her whole life to save for retirement. To think that Eric used her grief to manipulate her like that is something I'll never forgive. After we got all this information, the lawyer suggested filing for a formal investigation. At this point, it's clear that what Eric did wasn't just immoral, it was illegal. The fake death certificate alone is a massive red flag, not to mention the fraud and identity theft. While we were sorting through all this, Eric decided to show up at my mom's house unannounced. I guess he thought he could talk his way out of everything, but it didn't go the way he planned. My mom refused to let him in, which was huge because she's the type of person who always gives people the benefit of the doubt. She told him that until he came clean about everything, she didn't want to see him. That didn't stop Eric from trying, though. He started yelling through the door, saying he was sorry and that it was all a misunderstanding. He even tried to blame me, saying I'd left him in an impossible situation and he'd done what he thought was best. I didn't even bother responding to that. It was obvious he wasn't sorry. He was just scared of getting caught. Things took another turn when Emily, his wife, called me later that day. She'd been quiet during the wedding chaos, but now she wanted to talk. She told me she'd been suspicious of Eric for a while, but didn't have any proof until recently. Apparently, she'd found a folder in their home office labeled Liam's Estate. Inside were all kinds of forged documents, including the fake police report from Iceland. Emily sounded devastated. She kept apologizing and saying she wished she'd seen the signs earlier. I told her it wasn't her fault. Eric had fooled everyone, not just her. She said she was filing for divorce and was willing to cooperate with the investigation. That was a relief to hear because, honestly, I think her testimony could be crucial in taking Eric down. Right now, we're in the early stages of sorting out the legal mess. Our lawyer is working on getting my accounts unfrozen and tracking down the loans Eric took out in my name. It's going to be a long process, but at least we're making progress. Emotionally, though, it's been rough. I'm staying with my mom and Mark, which has been good, but there's so much tension in the house. My mom keeps blaming herself for not realizing something was wrong. I've told her over and over that it's not her fault, but I can tell she's still carrying a lot of guilt. As for me, I'm just trying to take it one day at a time. I've been reaching out to friends to let them know I'm alive, which has been awkward, to say the least. Most people are shocked but happy to hear from me. A few have been pretty angry, saying I should have done more to keep in touch while I was abroad. I get where they're coming from, but it's hard to explain how cut off I was. Oh, and one more thing. I reconnected with Rachel, my ex-girlfriend. We dated for a few years before I left, but we broke up not long before my trip. At the time, I thought it was because we'd grown apart, but now I'm starting to wonder if Eric had something to do with it. Rachel told me she always thought the breakup felt weird. She said there were rumors going around that I was cheating on her, which isn't true. I'm starting to think Eric might have planted those rumors to push us apart. We're just talking for now, nothing serious, but it's nice to have someone who understands what I'm going through. She even said she'd be willing to help testify if it comes to that. Anyway, that's where things stand for now. There's still a lot to untangle, and I'm sure I'll find out even more as we dig deeper into Eric's lies. I'll keep you all updated when there's more to share. Thanks again for listening. It really means a lot. Update 2. Hey Reddit. After the wedding and everything that came to light, you'd think things couldn't get any worse. But as it turns out, Eric's lies ran even deeper than I'd imagined. Once the dust settled a bit, our lawyer started digging into the mess Eric had made, and what we uncovered was straight up mind-blowing. For starters, the inheritance from our grandfather wasn't just the trust fund we thought it was. There were investments, big ones, that had been set up decades ago. These were supposed to mature when both Eric and I turned 28, splitting the payout equally between us. That payout was massive. I'm talking millions, but thanks to Eric's schemes, he managed to get his hands on all of it. Here's how he did it. After I left for Iceland, he went through some old files in my house, the one I trusted him to manage, and found the paperwork about the inheritance. He figured out that if one of us were declared dead, the other would inherit the full amount. That's when he started plotting. From what we can piece together, Eric spent months setting everything up. He forged emails, created fake hiking permits to make it seem like I was constantly putting myself in danger, and even hired someone to create a fake police report about my death. The level of planning that went into this is honestly terrifying. But that's not the worst of it. Eric didn't act alone. Turns out Patrick was in on it. This is the same guy who handled most of our legal matters for years. Someone my mom and I trusted completely. He helped Eric forge documents, file the fake death certificate, and even funnel the inheritance money into offshore accounts. Patrick played a huge role in making all of this possible. It gets worse, though. As the lawyer working with us now started unraveling the paper trail, we found out that Eric had been tampering with my life for years. I always thought I was just unlucky or bad at timing, but looking back, it's clear he was pulling the strings all along. Remember how I mentioned Rachel, my ex? Well, the lawyer found emails Eric sent to her from a fake account, pretending to be me. He'd made up this whole story about how I wasn't ready for a serious relationship and thought we should go our separate ways. Rachel had no reason to question it because the emails looked legit, and I was too busy prepping for Iceland to notice anything was off. And it wasn't just my personal life he messed with. Eric also sabotaged my career. Back when I was applying for jobs after college, I had a couple of interviews lined up with really great companies. I never heard back from them, and I figured I just didn't get the jobs. Well, guess what? Eric had been intercepting my mail and emails, canceling job offers on my behalf, and even trashing some of my applications. Finding all of this out was like getting punched over and over again. I started questioning everything, every missed opportunity, every failed relationship. How much of my life was actually mine, and how much of it had been quietly stolen by Eric? The most chilling part of all this was realizing how far back his resentment must go. I kept asking myself why. Why would he do all of this? What did I ever do to him? My lawyer suggested it might have something to do with our grandfather's will. Eric always felt like he was the favorite, and I guess seeing that inheritance split evenly between us was too much for him to handle. But even if that's true, it's hard to wrap my head around. We were brothers. We grew up together. I looked up to him my entire life. I trusted him. and he used that trust to ruin me. Then there's my mom. She's been taking this even harder than I am. Finding out that not one but two people she trusted, Eric and Patrick, were behind this has completely shattered her. She keeps blaming herself for not seeing the signs, and no matter how much I tell her it's not her fault, I can tell she doesn't believe. One thing that's been helping, though, is having Mark around. My mom's new husband is like a rock. He's been staying up late with me, going over documents and helping connect the dots. Mark even reached out to some of his old police contacts to make sure we had all the resources we needed to build a case. I didn't expect to rely on him so much, but I'm really grateful for him. Meanwhile, Eric has been quiet. Too quiet. After his failed attempt to talk his way out of this at my mom's house, he's been avoiding everyone. Emily, his wife, told me he's been staying with a friend and only coming home to grab clothes or check on Olivia. She's furious with him, and I can't blame her. From what she's told me, Eric has been lying to her for years too. Speaking of Olivia, this whole situation is hitting her hard. She's only 10, and she doesn't understand what's going on. All she knows is that her dad isn't around much and that her uncle, who she thought was dead, is suddenly back. She's been asking a lot of questions, but we're trying to be careful about how much we tell her. I don't want her to hate her dad, but I also don't want to lie to her. It's a tough balance. The lawyer says it's going to take weeks, maybe months, to untangle everything. Between the fake loans, the offshore accounts, and the inheritance, there's a lot of money unaccounted for. Eric was smart. I'll give him that. He covered his tracks well. But with Emily's cooperation and the evidence we've already found, we're confident we can take him down. Right now, I'm focused on reclaiming what's mine and helping my mom rebuild her trust in people. It's not easy, but I'm trying to take things one step at a time. I keep telling myself that the truth is out now, and that's what matters. The hard part is knowing there's still more to uncover. Every day it feels like I'm learning something new about what Eric did, and it's exhausting. I'm not sure I'll ever fully understand why he did this, or how he justified it to himself. But I do know one thing. I'm not letting him win. There's still a long road ahead, but I'm ready to fight for what's right. If Eric thought I'd just roll over and accept what he did, he's got another thing coming. That's where things stand for now. I'll update you all when there's more to share. Thanks for sticking with me through this. It means a lot. Update 3. Hey everyone, it's me again. A lot has happened since my last post, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of it. Things went from bad to worse with Eric, and what I thought was already the peak of his betrayal turned into something I couldn't have imagined. Let me break it down for you. After we uncovered all the evidence of Eric's fraud and theft, my lawyer and I filed an official complaint with the authorities. Things started moving quickly. The fake death certificate, the stolen inheritance, the loans. Eric was facing a mountain of charges. The police got involved, and within a few days, Eric was placed under house arrest. He wasn't allowed to leave his home, and they even put an ankle monitor on him to make sure he didn't try anything stupid. At first, I thought this was the end of it. He was caught. The investigation was ongoing, and it seemed like justice was finally going to be served. But of course, Eric couldn't just take responsibility for what he did. One night, I got a call from Emily, Eric's now estranged wife. She sounded panicked, and it took her a minute to get the words out. Eric was gone. He'd cut off his ankle monitor and vanished. My heart sank. How could this even happen? Weren't there supposed to be people watching him? Emily said she didn't know how long he'd been gone, but she found a note he left behind. The note didn't apologize or explain himself. It was short and chilling. I'm not going to prison for this. You'll regret coming after me. I won't lie. That freaked me out. I didn't know what he meant by, you'll regret it. But it wasn't good. The police were notified immediately, and a manhunt was launched. They suspected he was trying to flee the country, but tracking him down wasn't going to be easy. Things got even more intense when Emily called me again a few days later. She was packing up Olivia's things when she found something hidden in Eric's office. A burner phone and a notebook filled with details about fake IDs and plans to leave the country. Worse, there were notes about taking Olivia with him. This broke me. I couldn't believe he would stoop so low as to drag his own daughter into this mess. Olivia is only 10, and she's been through enough already. Emily was terrified, so the police moved her and Olivia to a safe house. I don't think I've ever seen Emily so shaken. She told me she'd had her suspicions about Eric over the years, but this was on a whole other level. The notebook also had a list of potential contacts Eric could use to help him disappear. Friends, shady business associates, even someone who apparently specializes in creating fake passports. The police started following up on these leads, but Eric was always one step ahead. For weeks, it felt like nothing was happening. The authorities were trying to track him down, but he was a ghost. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the fear that he might come after me or Emily or worse, Olivia. Mark, my mom's husband, was a huge help during this time. He used his connections in law enforcement to keep us updated and make sure we had some extra protection. Then, out of nowhere, the police got a break. Eric was spotted at a hotel near the Canadian border, trying to meet with one of his contacts. By the time they got there, he was gone, but they found evidence that he was heading to Canada. They put out alerts to airports, bus stations, and border crossings. It wasn't long after that when they finally caught him. Eric was arrested. He was trying to access one of his hidden accounts to withdraw cash, and that's what did him in. Apparently, he couldn't resist dipping into his stolen funds. The authorities had been monitoring suspicious transactions tied to him, and when he made a move, they swooped in. When they brought him back to the US, he was hit with a laundry list of charges: fraud, identity theft, falsifying documents, and violating his house arrest. The big one, though, was the attempt to kidnap Olivia. That charge alone carries a serious sentence, and I think it was the final nail in the coffin for him. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but the fallout from Eric's actions is still ongoing. The forensic accountants are still untangling the mess he left behind. So far, they've recovered about 60% of the inheritance, but the rest is tied up in offshore accounts and cryptocurrency. It's going to take years to fully clean up the damage he's done. On the personal side, things have been rough. My mom is still struggling to come to terms with what Eric did. She's in therapy now, which is helping, but I can see the pain in her eyes every time his name comes up. Olivia has been in therapy too, and she's starting to open up about how all of this has affected her. She asked me the other day why her dad tried to take her away, and I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain something like that to a 10-year-old? Emily has been amazing through all of this. She's been working closely with the authorities and providing as much information as she can to help build the case against Eric. She's also filed for divorce, which I think is the best thing she could do for herself and Olivia. As for me, I'm trying to move forward. The family lawyer has started the process of reinstating my legal identity, which has been more complicated than I expected. There's so much paperwork involved, and I keep running into roadblocks because, legally, I was dead for 3 years. It's frustrating, but I'm determined to get my life back on track. One bright spot in all of this has been reconnecting with Rachel, my ex. She's been incredibly supportive, and we've spent a lot of time talking about everything that's happened. It's too early to say where things are headed, but it's nice to have her back in my life. I know this story has been a lot to take in, and trust me, living it has been even crazier. I still have moments where I wake up and wonder if this is all some kind of bad dream, but then I remind myself that the truth is out now, and Eric can't hurt us anymore. There's still a long road ahead, but I'm hopeful. My family is stronger than Eric's lies, and I'm not going to let him define the rest of my life. Thanks again for all the support. It's been a huge comfort to know there are people out there rooting for me. I'll keep you posted if anything new comes up. Final update. Hey everyone! It's been a few months since I last posted, and I finally feel ready to share how everything wrapped up. A lot has happened since Eric was caught, and while things are far from perfect, my family and I are finally starting to move forward. I never imagined my life would take this turn, but in a way, it's helped me appreciate what I still have. Let's start with Eric. After his arrest in Belize, he was brought back to the US and faced trial for all the charges stacked against him. The case was solid. Eric's lawyer tried to argue that he was under immense pressure and made poor choices, but nobody bought it. The prosecution painted a clear picture of a man who had spent years manipulating and stealing from the people closest to him. They even brought in Emily to testify. She didn't hold back, detailing everything she'd found in their home. Seeing her take the stand was powerful, and it reminded me how strong she's been through all of this. The verdict was no surprise. Eric was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, forgery, and attempted kidnapping. The judge didn't hold back during sentencing, calling his actions a calculated betrayal of trust. Eric was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 15. It's a long time, but honestly, I don't think any sentence could truly make up for the damage he caused. Now that Eric is out of the picture, the process of rebuilding has begun. The forensic accountants managed to recover most of the stolen inheritance. What's left of the money has been placed in a trust, split between Olivia and me. The company shares that were part of the inheritance have been returned to my control, which was a bit overwhelming at first. I never planned to run anything like this, but I've hired a great team to help me manage things. The company itself is doing surprisingly well, considering everything it went through. Some of the employees who lost their jobs because of Eric's mismanagement have been rehired, and we're slowly rebuilding trust with our clients. It's not easy, but knowing that the company is stable again has been a huge weight off my shoulders. My mom has been focusing on her own healing. She's still working with a therapist, but I can see she's starting to find peace. A few weeks ago, she made the decision to legally change her last name to Marks, saying she didn't want to be associated with Eric anymore. It was an emotional moment for her, but I think it was the right choice. As for Emily and Olivia, they're doing well too. Emily finalized the divorce from Eric and has been working on creating a new life for herself and her daughter. Olivia is still in therapy, and while she's had some tough questions about her dad, she's handling things better than I expected. She started playing soccer and making new friends, which is great to see. One of the most unexpected things to come out of this is how close Emily and I have become. We weren't particularly close before all of this, but going through it together has created a bond. She's like a sister to me now, and we've made it a point to stay in each other's lives for Olivia's sake. On a personal level, I've been working hard to reclaim my identity, both legally and emotionally. Getting all the paperwork sorted out was a nightmare, but I finally have everything back in my name. The first time I held my new ID, I felt this strange mix of relief and sadness. It was a reminder of everything I'd been through, but also of how far I'd come. Rachel and I have been spending more time together. Learning that Eric sabotaged our relationship was tough for both of us, but we're trying to move forward. One of the most healing things I've done is start a project in honor of my grandfather. Using a portion of the recovered inheritance, I set up a foundation that helps victims of financial fraud rebuild their lives. It's a way to turn all this pain into something positive, and knowing I'm helping others gives me a sense of purpose. The foundation has already made a difference. We've partnered with organizations that provide free legal services and financial counseling to people who've been through similar situations. It's humbling to hear their stories, and it reminds me that I'm not alone in this. The other day, Olivia asked me a question that really stuck with me. She said, "Uncle Liam, are you happy now?" It caught me off guard because, honestly, I hadn't thought about it in those terms. Am I happy? I'm not sure, but I'm hopeful, and I think that's a good start. This whole experience has changed me in ways I'm still figuring out. I've learned how fragile trust can be, but I've also learned how strong people can be when they're pushed to their limits. My family is smaller now, but it feels stronger. We've been through hell, but we've come out the other side. To anyone reading this who's dealing with betrayal or loss, I want you to know it's possible to rebuild. It's not easy, and it takes time, but it's worth it. Sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the most unexpected growth. Thank you to everyone who followed this journey and offered support along the way. Your advice, encouragement, and kind words meant more than I can say. If anything new comes up, I'll let you know. But for now, I'm ready to close this chapter and move forward. Take care, everyone. Liam.